The lawyer slid the folder across the table and said, Mrs. Carter opened these accounts using your Social Security number 11 years ago, and she's been managing them under your name ever since. Brooke stared down at her own signature, forged in her mother's careful handwriting on a loan she never applied for, and realized the woman who raised her had been quietly stealing pieces of her life since Brooke was 23 years old. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. Brooke Carter got the email that ended her career at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. She read it twice, sitting in her parked car outside her Charleston office, the words blurring together: merger, restructuring, different direction, until they added up to one plain, brutal fact. The Ashcroft restoration contract, the one she had chased for 3 years, the one that would have put her company on the map from Savannah to Wilmington, was gone. She sat there for a long moment with her hands still on the wheel, staring at nothing, feeling the kind of quiet that comes right before grief. Then she did what she always did when the world caved in. She breathed, wiped her face, and drove 2 hours to Greenville because some stubborn, hopeful part of her still believed home was where you went to be put back together. She should have known better by now. She really should have. When she walked through her parents' front door, nobody looked up. Her mother, Linda, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in numbers. Her father, Robert, stared into his coffee like it might rescue him from whatever conversation was already underway. Her younger sister, Madison, sat with her arms crossed, looking annoyed before Brooke had even said a word. "Thank God you're here," Linda said, not glancing up. "We need to talk about Madison's car payment. If your business is slowing down, like you mentioned, we need a real plan." Brooke blinked, still standing in the doorway with her keys in her hand. "Mom, I just lost the biggest contract of my career. 3 years of work, gone in one email." "I know, honey, that's awful," Linda said, waving a hand as if swatting away something small. "But this is more urgent right now. Madison and Ethan are getting married in the spring, and they need somewhere to stay while they save up for their own place." "Okay," Brooke said slowly, setting her bag down. "What does that have to do with tonight?" Robert finally lifted his eyes from his coffee, and something in them told her the answer before her mother said it out loud. "They need your room, honey," Linda said, as casually as if she were choosing a paint color for the hallway. "You're hardly ever here anymore. Madison needs the stability right now. You understand." "I understand," Brooke repeated, quietly, testing the words in her mouth like they belonged to someone else. "Don't make this difficult," Linda said. "You have your own place in Charleston. Madison doesn't have anywhere." Something cracked quietly in Brooke's chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of a person finally seeing her exact place in a family she had spent her whole life trying to hold together. For 2 years, ever since her father's back surgery, she had driven to Greenville nearly every single weekend. She had covered the surgery costs insurance wouldn't touch. She had paid the mortgage twice when his disability checks were delayed. She had quietly cleared Madison's credit card 3 separate times, believing each time it truly was the last. She didn't argue. She walked upstairs and began folding the sweaters she kept in the closet for weekend visits. Robert appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, silently packing a box of her old books, unable to meet her eyes. "Dad," she said, not looking up from the closet, "you could say something." He was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother's already decided," he finally said, which wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. "That's not what I asked." He didn't respond. He just kept packing the box, his hands moving slower than they needed to, like some old guilt had finally caught up to him, and he didn't know where to put it down. Brooke watched him and understood, maybe for the first time, that her father's silence wasn't neutral. It had always been a choice, made over and over, every time it would have cost him something to speak. The drive back to Charleston felt different from every drive before it. She didn't cry. She made herself a promise instead, quietly, out loud, to the empty car. She would never again mistake being needed for being loved. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that Brooke wasn't just getting by. Carter Heritage Restorations had become one of the most respected historic preservation firms on the South Carolina coast. And 2 years earlier, using a private trust so no one in her family would find out, she had quietly bought back her late grandfather's old house on Edisto Island, the very house Grandma Evelyn had been forced to sell after his death left her buried in medical debt. Brooke visited her grandmother the following weekend, before she'd decided what to do about anything else. Evelyn was 81. Sharp-eyed, and still made her coffee far too strong. They sat together on Evelyn's small back porch in Greenville, the porch that wasn't nearly as beautiful as the one she used to have, and her grandmother reached over and patted her hand. "You look tired, baby," Evelyn said. "Tireder than usual." "I'm okay, Grandma." "You've been saying that since you were 9 years old, and it wasn't true then either." Evelyn smiled, but her eyes stayed serious, studying her granddaughter's face the way only grandmothers can. "You know, I still dream about that old house on the island. Silliest thing at my age. I dream I'm standing on that porch again, and your grandfather's out back fixing something that isn't even broken, just to have something to do with his hands." She laughed softly, then her voice dropped lower. "I'd give anything for one more Thanksgiving there before I get too old to enjoy it." Brooke said nothing, but she held on to those words like a promise she hadn't spoken yet, turning them over in her mind the whole drive home. Every weekend, she didn't waste pretending to belong to a family that only wanted her wallet. She spent on Edisto Island instead, sanding warped floorboards, replacing rotted beams, restoring the wraparound porch where her grandfather used to sit and watch the tide roll in every evening. It became her secret, the one place in the world where she wasn't Brooke the fixer, Brooke the reliable one, Brooke the daughter who never complained. She was simply Brooke, rebuilding something broken with her own 2 hands, one nail at a time. A week after being pushed out of her childhood bedroom, she sat alone at her kitchen table in Charleston and did something she had never once done before. She canceled every automatic payment tied to her family. The utility bill she'd quietly covered for 3 years, Madison's car insurance, her father's supplemental health premium. One by one, she severed the financial lifelines she had built without anyone ever knowing they existed. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to peace settle over her. The consequences arrived quickly. Linda called about a disconnection notice, her voice tight with panic. Madison sent 4 increasingly angry texts about her lapsed car insurance, the last one simply reading, "Did you do this on purpose?" Robert left a quiet, confused voicemail about a missed mortgage payment, his tone more bewildered than accusing. Brooke let most of the calls ring out into silence. She had spent years being the family's emergency line, always answering, always available. She was done answering on demand. It was during that quiet, distant month that she found something that broke her in an entirely different way. While reviewing her credit report for a business loan application, she found 3 accounts she had never opened: a department store credit card, a personal loan, and auto financing agreement. All managed for years without her knowledge, all technically hers. The signatures, clumsily disguised, were unmistakably her mother's handwriting. She sat alone in her office long after dark, staring at the paperwork spread across her desk, feeling something heavier than anger settle into her chest. It felt like grief, the particular kind reserved for realizing someone you loved was never quite who you believed them to be. She thought about her father's guilty hands packing that cardboard box and wondered how much he'd known and simply chosen not to see. She hired an attorney the following week. That was the folder, the one with her forged signature staring back at her from the page. 11 years of quiet theft laid out in plain black and white. "You have every right to press charges," the lawyer told her, sliding the folder closed. "But that's your decision to make, not mine. I can only tell you what the law allows." Brooke didn't decide right away. Instead, she went back to the island and finished what she'd started months earlier. While tearing out a water-damaged section of wall in the old sitting room, she found an envelope tucked inside, yellowed with age. It was a letter in her grandmother's handwriting, written to her late grandfather years before he passed. It talked about their wedding day on that very porch, about raising 2 children in that house, and it ended with a single line that stopped Brooke cold. "If I ever get to come home again, I'll know I've been given the one thing money never bought us, a family who chose to stay." Brooke read it twice, folded it carefully, and made her decision. Not about the fraud, not yet. About her grandmother first. She spent the following weeks preparing legal papers granting Evelyn lifetime residency in the restored house, no matter what happened with anyone else in the family. Then, almost as if fate had a sense of humor, Linda called to announce, breathless with excitement, that she'd booked a beautiful historic rental on Edisto Island for Thanksgiving, found through some restoration company's event website. She had no idea whose company it was. She had absolutely no idea whose house it was. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a cold, bright sky stretched out over the island. Family members filed in, admiring the restored porch, the gleaming heart pine floors, the wide view of the water, praising Linda for finding such a stunning property on short notice. Linda soaked it in, telling anyone who would listen how she'd always had an eye for these things. Brooke waited until the table was full, until Evelyn was seated at its head, before she stood. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mom didn't find this house. I own it. I've owned it for 2 years. I'm the one who restored it, board by board, on all the weekends you thought I was too busy to visit." Silence dropped over the table like a curtain falling. "This was Grandpa's house," Brooke continued, "the one we lost after he died. I bought it back, and I spent 2 years rebuilding it, and I did it for one reason." She turned to her grandmother and placed the folder gently in front of her. "Grandma, this gives you the legal right to live here for as long as you want. This house is yours again. It always should have been." Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened the folder, tears rolling freely down her face. "Baby, how did you—" "I found your letter," Brooke said softly, "the one about coming home." Linda's face had gone pale. "Brooke, I don't understand what's happening." "There's more," Brooke said, and this time her voice didn't waver at all. She looked directly at her mother. "I know about the accounts, Mom. The loans, the credit cards, all of it, opened in my name for 11 years without ever asking me." The color drained from Linda's face entirely. Madison's fork clattered against her plate. Robert set his glass down slowly, and for the first time in Brooke's entire life, he spoke without needing to be pushed into it. "She's telling the truth," he said quietly, looking at his wife, then at his daughter. "I knew some of it. I should have said something years ago, Brooke. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never once stood up for you when it mattered." The apology landed heavier than Brooke expected, not because it fixed anything, but because she had waited her entire life to hear it, and some quiet, wounded part of her finally let go of a breath she'd been holding for years. Madison, to her credit, didn't try to defend their mother. She sat there staring at her plate, seeing for the first time, maybe, the years of quiet sacrifice she'd never had to notice because Brooke had made sure she never needed to. Ethan, watching the unraveling of a family he was about to marry into, quietly excused himself from the table, and Madison didn't stop him. Brooke didn't shout. She didn't demand apologies or stage a dramatic confrontation. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said calmly. "I'm not deciding tonight what happens with the accounts, but I am deciding that I'm done being everyone's safety net while I disappear from view. If we're going to be a family again, it starts with the truth, not with what I can pay for." Linda cried quietly into her napkin. Robert reached for his wife's hand, then reached for his daughter's, holding both at once, as if trying 20 years too late to hold his family together with his own two hands, instead of leaving the weight of it all to Brooke. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the harder conversations had softened into something gentler, Brooke sat on the porch beside her grandmother, watching the sun sink slowly into the water exactly the way Evelyn had once described in her dream. "You didn't just fix up an old house," Evelyn said, squeezing her hand tightly. "You gave this family back something it lost a long time ago." "I hope so, Grandma." "You didn't do it for revenge," Evelyn said, turning to look at her. "You did it out of love. That's the only reason it actually worked." Brooke smiled, watching the tide roll in the same way it had when she was a little girl, sitting on this very porch beside a grandfather who used to fix things that weren't broken just to have something to do with his hands. She understood now that she'd spent years doing the exact same thing, fixing what wasn't hers to fix just to feel needed. Tonight, for the first time, she'd fixed something that was truly broken, and it had finally started to heal. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own sacrifices, or your own long overdue boundaries, please subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales, because these stories are made for anyone who has ever given everything to the people who took it for granted and finally found the courage to say enough. Real strength isn't found in staying silent forever. It's found in knowing when silence has cost you too much and choosing the truth instead, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever had to do. What is the significant educational or other value in this story? This story illustrates how unchecked favoritism and financial dependency can quietly erode trust within a family, often for years before anyone acknowledges the harm being done. It shows the importance of healthy boundaries, demonstrating that love and generosity should never become an unspoken obligation or a silent substitute for respect. The story also highlights the seriousness of identity theft, even within families, and the courage required to address it through proper legal channels, rather than staying silent to preserve a fragile peace. Finally, it offers a hopeful lesson in redemption, showing that honesty, accountability, and forgiveness, rather than revenge, are what truly rebuild relationships worth saving.